Welcome back, everybody, to the second part on our EC series on EDM resin and EDM resin regeneration. So we are broadcasting this from our experience center in the McKenna dye mold building in Auburn Hills. I am Mark Bay. I'm market segment manager for EDM and for consumables. And I'm here with Bruce Iverson, president of Nationwide DI Water Solutions out of Elgin, Minnesota. Bruce took us through the process of regenerating the resin at his facility and what goes into the process in terms of equipment and so forth. And today we're going to continue that conversation, talk a little bit about different resin tank setups, about environmental aspects of resin regeneration, and also quality control aspects. And again, as a reminder, we do have the chat and the QA options here in the tool while you're watching this event. And please feel free to put your questions in here. We'll be happy to answer them after this portion is over, towards the end of the event. So Bruce, welcome back. Thank you for joining us here again, and I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Mark, for having me here again for this second part on EDM resin. And we left off, I believe, right after we went through the process of the regeneration. And on this slide, I'll just talk really quick about the waste product this resin creates. So when we regenerate the resin, we actually have heavy metals and stuff that is taken off the resin beads. So we have to process that at our facility, and it kind of goes through a pH adjustment, and then adding a polymer and stuff to let the metals and stuff settle out before we can actually pump that through a filter press. And after the filter press, it goes through another filtering system before it goes to the sanitary district and is discharged.
And these metal deposits, right, that are on the resin beads, they are obviously a result of the waste that's generated in the EDM process. Now, obviously, as you're the regenerator and the recycler, I mean, you don't really know what the original end user in the EDM process, what they were cutting, right? It can be, it can be your standard tool steel. I mean, it can be beryllium, it can be copper, it can be anything that's conductive. So does that create issues?
Yeah, these days, there are so many different industries cutting exotic metals and stuff. So when we're doing these 60 cubic foot batches, we really don't have any idea who's cutting what and what is in their resin bottles or bags. But we actually have to have this stuff waste tested, and it's tested daily and stuff. So we are licensed by the local sanitary district and the state of Minnesota to be able to process this waste and dispose of this waste properly. For the most part, EDM resin it's rated as non-hazardous. So there's not a big problem with hazardous waste in the resin regenerations for the EDM machines. But that is kind of a quick summary on the waste, so our viewers are able to kind of know that that product that they are sending out, there are some environmental steps that have to be taken to get rid of that waste as we regenerate their product.
Yeah, and get rid of the waste in the right way.
Correct.
And I think that kind of speaks against, sometimes you see that in the field, like people refill their own resin bottles, they kind of rinse them out, and they just discharge locally. And that is something that can really create, issues, environmental issues, and, for the person or for the company that would do that, it's legal issues too. Correct. So don't do it.
On this slide, we went through the resin properties and the water quality in part one, but I'll just kind of touch on it really quick, how important it is, and I think Mark will agree that your conductivity or resistivity on these machines, these EDM machines for cutting, are very important, that you meet the qualities and stuff that you have to have. So here we're going to talk about pH. pH stands for potential hydrogen, and a lot of people don't know that.
So that's kind of acidity, right?
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yeah. So in the EDM machine work tanks, there's, what size are the tanks? How much water do them work tanks usually hold? Or depends on machine?
Depends on the machine size.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know, you can from 50 gallons to several hundred gallons.
Yeah. So if these machines, if they sit over the weekend and aren't being ran and stuff, the deionized water, it can collect CO2 from the air. And when it collects that CO2 from the air, it can make that water sitting in that tank, it can lower the pH. So your pH, neutral pH is 7. So if that system sits over a long weekend, holiday weekend, that pH can go down to 6, 5.5, which can affect your cutting and stuff. So, you know, it's a big deal as far as with some of these parts and stuff they're cutting. And I just want people to, you know, we get calls all the time about, you know, the pH of the water is low. Well, a lot of times we find out that that tank has been sitting for over a holiday weekend and not being used. And I think probably at that point, you either have to dump that tank and start over, or recirculate that water for a while to get that pH back up to where it needs to be.
So makeup water, that's an important topic, because obviously there's loss of the dielectric fluid due to evaporation in the cutting process, just standard evaporation into the environment, and then depending on how we fill that back up, there are certain aspects to consider. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. The makeup water, a lot of people, if they don't use deionized water to refill their work tanks when they become low because of the evaporation while they're working and stuff, if they just hook up to city water or well water, that TDS, total dissolved solids, from that city water or well water is going to be, you know, it could be 100, excuse me, it could be 150, it could be 450. And that's going to drastically affect that work tank, and that machine's not going to start until you've waited, could be a half hour, could be 1 hour, while you recirculate that city water, well water, through that system that has to go through that DI tank to get down to the resistivity that that machine needs to actually operate. So by using a makeup water bottle, all it is another deionized resin bottle hooked up to your city water or a well water, and you run that water through the DI bottle, and you use that water to fill your makeup or your work tank. That way your machine has no downtime. The water is, the conductivity and everything is where it needs to be when they start working.
Tank heads and fittings, there are so many options and configurations out there, and Bruce, you brought a few here, and maybe if you could take us through, you know, a few of the variations that there are, and talk a little bit about what you see in terms of advantages, disadvantages.
We can start with the MW head cam lock fittings. This is what SST, Single Source Technologies, this is the preferred head that they use on all their tanks. Is actually one of my preferred heads, but everybody has their own preferences. Advantages for this cam lock head is it's so easy to hook up your machine to it, and it's so quick and stuff. Disadvantages, I think over time, there's rubber O-rings inside the female fittings that are on the machine that have to be replaced, because eventually they'll get wore and they start to leak a little bit.
So what that means though is that once a user notices that, you know, there's a little bit of leakage coming from the connectors, you don't have to exchange the bottle, right? It can be just the O-ring inside the gaskets.
Yeah, just ask their salesperson for some new gaskets for the cam lock fitting on the machine, and they should be set to go. The other disadvantage is people have trouble sometimes during shipping and stuff, and these cam locks they bust off and they have to be replaced. But overall, the cam lock is my choice.
And I think it's also important, right, for resin bottles that the in and the out on the bottle don't get exchanged. And these have the color coding, they have the in and out engraved on top, because otherwise the whole DI process is not going to work.
If there ever is any heads that don't have the in and out engraved, we color code. So we always color code the black to the end. I consider the black the dirty water from the city, or going in and being cleaned, and coming out the yellow side being clean. That's how we kind of know what is in and out. This is the same type of head. But it's white. So you will see these heads, and the customers will see these heads when they buy new Makino machines. Each machine comes with 2 new tanks, and the virgin resin in the tanks, the white head signifies that that's virgin resin. Some of the customers, as you know, do special cutting where they use virgin resin, and their heads would be also white because they get refilled with virgin resin when they come into the facility. Another MW head, but this one is garden hose style. So basically it's just got male garden hoses on each side. A lot of people do use these. Basically it's still a quick disconnect. Sometimes the nylon threads will get wore and you'll start getting some leakage, so you would have to replace the fittings on these.
And what is that part underneath, like that stick there?
Yeah, so a lot of the end users and stuff using the machines and stuff, they see the outside of the tank, they see the top of the head, but they don't know what's actually inside the tank. So basically, this tube here, it's a slotted distributor on the bottom. Excuse me. And it actually goes down to the bottom of the tank. So when you put the water in your tank, it goes through the small inlet screen on the top, and from the inlet screen, the water goes through the resin and to the bottom of the tank, and through these slots, the pure water, the treated water, comes up through the tube and goes through the outside of the tank. So that's just kind of wanted people to know what was inside the tank. And then we have another head. Used to be very commonly used. Some dealers and stuff pushed this head and they liked it, but over the years it has kind of disappeared. We call it a U-pin head. So basically it's just a cap on it. It's got little ears on it and stuff. And you actually need another head that would go on top of this head for that. This would stay with the machine. So problems with this style of head is you've got O-rings on the head that stays on the machine that need to be changed out if they get pinched while you're putting it on. These little ears and stuff will get broke off, then you got to replace the whole head. There seems to be a little more maintenance that has to be done with this style of head. This head here is what we call a CH head. So basically it's an in and out coming out the top, and it's got 2 male gardenia fittings screwed onto it with quick disconnects that go right on it, and these quick disconnects go right onto the hoses off the machine. People like this style. It's probably the only reason they don't is if these elbows or something would break off or something instead of coming out the sides. And as you can see, we've got a little screen trap here too coming on the out of the resin bottle. And that screen trap, we'll talk a little bit about this in one of the next slides coming up too. So.
But one thing too that stands out is like all the other head configurations. It's not as clear what the in and out is. So,
yeah.
Right. It's not color coded. It's
correct.
Can be a little bit easier to accidentally hook up incorrectly.
Yeah. And I guess this last item here, this is a conductivity light with a resistivity light that monitors the water. This can actually be put into the outside of the DI tank in line with in the hose, and this will be a red light if the water becomes exhausted, and it'll be green as the water is still good to be running on that machine.
Now, I mean, machines nowadays have, right, they have their own
Correct.
conductivity/resistivity meter. Typically it's conductivity meter. So they will tell you if the conductivity goes outside of a realm, but there's still, I see these used a lot, like more like on the makeup
water side. Yeah.
Makeup water side, so that we don't shock the system. So I think that's where there's a advantage to these.
So there,
let's go to
move on.
Activated carbon. So it's not really resin, but it is used in conjunction with resin. And is that correct?
Yeah. So a lot of your activated carbon, it'll be put into a tank just like a resin tank. And what activated carbon does, it removes chlorine and stuff from, if you're on city water for a makeup water bottle, you want to remove that chlorine before it goes through the resin, because it'll actually extend the resin life. A lot of your cities are just dousing your city water with chlorine these days, so that's what the activated carbon would be used for if they have high doses of chlorine in their water. Resin screens, we were just on that topic. So resin screens, very important part of the resin system on an EDM machine. When I say important, it can make
it's a life insurance almost.
Yeah, it can make a user, somebody operating a machine, if they don't have these on their machine and something internally in that resin tank goes bad, them little resin beads will leak all the way through into their resin machine. And you probably talk to people that have had that problem, and they're not happy customers.
No, it's really detrimental. The resin beads, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of them, go through your whole water system, through the pumps, through your valves, and where have you, and all of that needs to be cleaned out. And you usually need to bring a technician in. It's probably going to keep your machine down for at least a couple days. If you can get somebody in right away. It's an enormous mess, and it can be, you can protect yourself from that 100% by using these filter screens.
Yeah, and these are such a inexpensive insurance policy. That downtime, it's costs thousands and thousands of dollars when these machines aren't running. So, I mean, very cheap, inexpensive way to keep that from happening. Environmental responsibility. So, we talked a little bit about the waste and stuff that the resin beads collect off the EDM machines and stuff. And, everybody's got to take their own responsibility when it comes to treating the EDM resin and the waste that comes off them. The waste is created by the company or the owner of the EDM machine. So they are actually responsible for getting rid of that waste, disposing of that waste in a legal manner. I mean, if people would throw that waste just in the dumpster and stuff, and somebody would catch them do that or whatever, there could be huge fines from the EPA on that, because it's still it's a heavy metal. It's just not a hazardous metal. There's a lot of zinc and copper and stuff in that stuff. So I just want to remind the the viewers and stuff that it's kind of what they say, cradle to grave. So it actually, the waste starts at the EDM machine, and even though it comes to my facility, I am licensed by the state and federal government to dispose and take care of this waste for them, but they are still the producers of it, so they do have a hand in it. So they need to make sure whoever's doing their process has the right permits and stuff to do it.
Okay. Thank you.
TCLP testing. So it's, basically these 8 metals are all considered hazardous metals. And I know, with some of the cutting and stuff that's going on and stuff, some of these metals are, whether it's in the coating of wires or metal itself that they're cutting and stuff, we are actually tested at our company for these metals, and if they are being used, our tests aren't showing enough volume where it's not showing up on any of our tests. So we are tested quarterly on this stuff.
So they are, even if they're in there at such a low
levels that they're not detected.
Yeah.
So we've never had a problem with EDM resin on any of the waste. Quality control and environment. We kind of talked about the environment and the licensing and stuff, how important it is. Whoever you use for a resin regeneration, whether it's Nationwide DI or somebody else that is actually doing it, make sure that they have their permits and their licensing. And if you, as a operator or a company that has EDM machines, you should actually have their license and permits and stuff on file in case the EPA comes into your shop and says, or and they want to see, okay, where are you sending your product to? Are they licensed? So.
Excellent. So some resin tips. How can a user extend the resin life, and what are some, are there things that we gotta keep a good eye on or that we shouldn't be doing?
Yeah, a lot of your resin, resin tips, a lot of it has to do with maintenance on your machines. Not, the regular maintenance on your machines by changing out your filters and stuff, and cleaning your probes on your machines and stuff. That all is going to help your resin life go longer. Some people will install a 20 micron small filter before it goes into the DI tank. I've seen that happen too.
That's just basically also as a little bit of an insurance
policy, but yeah, but I think for the most part, a lot of times the big filters that the EDM machines have, they're very costly filters, and I think there are some customers that went with a less expensive filter. Well, when you go with a less expensive filter, it's not filtering everything it should out of that EDM machine, and it goes into the resin, and then the resin becomes the filter.
And which then decreases resin life.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah.
So that maintenance on the machines.
Yeah. And one thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, also like sometimes if we clean the inside of the tanks and we use, let's say, an acid or something, and we're not careful and don't wipe it out correctly, etc., and that gets into the dielectric fluid or some other additives, would those have an effect on the resin life as well? Yeah,
a lot of some of the customers will be using what they call a rust inhibitor, I believe, for the parts and stuff. If they don't use that correctly and put the right, it should be measured out to gallons of their work tank. Yeah. If they're just dumping in large amounts of this stuff, the resin becomes gooey, and it's almost like a slime, and it affects my process when I have to do work with that type of resin too.
So it's more like more is not better when on a lot of those additives. It's got to be the right amount and less. Probably caution on the side of less than of more.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, because I think the reason for that is so when they remove the parts, them parts are kind of coated so they don't rust. I think that's what they use that for.
Sometimes, or if they sit in the dielectric water for extended amount of time.
Okay.
So,
And I think that's another, it goes back to the maintenance again. I believe them work tanks need to be cleaned out every, I don't know, every so many hours, or I'm not sure what the maintenance is, but if they're not done in a timely fashion, that DI water in them work tanks can create a fungus and stuff, bacteria that'll grow on them tanks, which will affect your cutting process and everything.
yeah.
So I believe, conclusion of this second segment inside the classroom anyway is, the environmental stuff that we talked about, the maintenance on the machines, water quality, it's all very important to them EDM machines to work correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, thank you very much, Bruce. And then, we are going to be moving into a Q&A, and again, we'll take a look and answer the submitted questions that came in through the Q&A through the chat functions. Thank you very much.